talking Illinois high school football.
If your goals are as high as you talk about, tonight's the night you go out and just take one more step.
It's a view from the West.
And it starts right now!
Welcome into View from the West podcast, the podcast covering Illinois high school football on the western side of the state of Illinois. I'm your host, Greg Armstrong, and this is the start of our season previews. We're starting with the Northwest Upstate Illini Conference and 8-man football. So you know if we're starting in the Northwest Upstate Illini, we're bringing in my man from NUIC football, Kyle Kampmeyer. Kyle, I know if we're on a Zoom call together, that means that football is here.
Hey, it's about time. I mean, we talked about it earlier this year when we were talking about some things going on, and here we are, and it's about time to get going.
So you're here. Mitch is not. Mitch is traveling. He's in Dallas. He says it's for work. I'm not sure he's still working tonight, but, you know, out to dinner, doing whatever he's doing. He can't be bothered right now. That's fine. That's fine. The podcast comes second tonight. That's fine. So while he's in Dallas, we'll have to find things to talk about here, you and I, in the Northwest Upstate Illini. I'm sure you can figure out something to talk about for the next hour, right?
Oh, yeah. I think between me and you, we'll have it covered.
Yeah, that's
if Mitch
exactly
comes,
right.
He comes.
That's right. So Mitch may join us. He may not. We'll see. It's we're on his schedule, but we'll get started here. Of course, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Breedlove Sporting Goods, Western Illinois' premier sporting goods store for uniforms, apparel, equipment, awards, and online team stores. They provide all the same sporting goods services like the big nationwide companies, but with a faster turnaround and their uniform pricing at a fraction of the cost that you're probably used to. They have the name brands, Adidas, Under Armour, Nike, and are extremely responsive with inquiries. With a primary focus on the western side of the state of Illinois, Breedlove Sporting Goods is the fastest way to outfit your team. Check them out on Facebook, or you can head to breedlovesports.com or shoot an email to calbreedlove@gmail.com. All right, it's time to jump in. We're starting in the Northwest Upstate Illini. And Kyle, if we're starting in the NUIC, I think we say it, well, at least the last 3 years, we've said the same thing. We got to start with the team on top. We got to start with the king. That's Lena Winslow. They 14-0, once again, 1A state champions. They've now won it 3 years in a row. You know, what do you say about this team, about this program that hasn't already been said? But here we are. It's a new year. It's a new roster. And, it's time to dive into it and see what do they have bringing back, and are they going to keep up at that high level?
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the talks of what Lena Winslow is, and I don't think anybody will be surprised when we open up the preseason rankings and see them ranked number one in state to start the year. I think at this point in time, they're kind of expected to be there as well. Coming back after winning their third consecutive state title. And of course, you got a lot of people out there that are heavily favoring them again for another run for a state championship, regardless of what Coach Aaron may be saying about them. You know, he's very great at deflecting information off. But I know at the same time, they're very excited with what they have coming in. Unfortunately, unlike years past, they do have a lot of holes that they do need to fill this year, where we're used to seeing them have few holes to fill and able to continue to complement that with other returners. And this year, they're going to rely heavily on Gage Dunker.
Yeah, Gage Dunker, definitely a name that was on my list, along with Nick Tippett at running back. You know, Dunker will also be on the defensive side of the ball as an outside linebacker. Odin Strabanow at defensive line, Tanner Kemple, defensive lineman as well. Two names to watch out for. I got to give a shout out to Coach Aaron. He was the very first coach to respond to our preseason form. He had it in right away. But I will say his insight for what areas do you need to improve, Kyle, his answer was everywhere. Every area they need to improve. If they're 14-0 and 3-time defending state champions and they need to improve everywhere, what does the rest of the league need to do?
Well, to be quite honest, in his defense, if you're not looking to improve, how do you expect to keep getting better?
I get it. That's a good head coach. I'm ribbing him. I'm giving him a little, but it's true. That's a sign of a good coach and a good program, right? You're never settling. they're going to have depth on the offensive and defensive line, which I think is always key. And they're going to have that good team speed. Kyle, I got to imagine this is a team that you envision is going to be at or near the top of the NUIC when it all shakes out.
Absolutely. I mean, right now, just looking through their schedule, that they open up relatively easily with West Carroll. Then they kind of run into Fulton, Stockton, and Dakota before they head down week 5 to Decatur to play St. Teresa. So, I mean, in years past, this tends to prove to be a very easy opening few weeks here for Lena Winslow to really allow them to get the train rolling, so to speak, to play Panther football of what we've become accustomed to see over the past 13, 14 years now. And then the last half of their schedules where it really starts to pick up a little bit after St. Teresa with Dupec in week 6. And then you have Forreston looming there in week 9.
Yep. Well, the NUIC schedule, it never disappoints. The later you get in the year, there's a key matchup, 2 or 3 key matchups every week that you're going to look to. And you brought them up, Forreston. Let's jump into the Forreston Cardinals. They finished the year 8-5. They were 5-4 in the regular season, then made a run to the semifinals. And I got to give you credit on the playoff preview show. You called it. You said this is a team that could very easily make that march out there. And they did. I mean, what did you see on that team then that you thought, had that potential?
Well, I just looked at a few of the losses that they had, and it hurts me to say it, but at the same time, it part of it's true. The loss to Dakota, I said it on the playoff show. It wasn't a game that I felt Dakota should have won in that regular season. I felt that Forreston was the better team, of which when you look, hindsight is always 2020. Obviously, Forreston did get that win in the quarterfinals over Dakota, but it was still a very highly contested game. I mean, Dakota had an early lead. They had opportunities still late in the game. They just didn't make it happen. So, looking back, I was probably a little premature in saying that, Forreston lost that game and they shouldn't have. I mean, Dakota did earn that win, But I just felt that, you took a look at the injuries that Forreston sustained, even in that semifinal game. They were down 5 starters in that game. And, their rushing attack, the way that they can move the ball, their line play was solid. You could just see that there was things that were there that if they could get them all going at the same time, and the way the playoff pairings fell out, you could just see it was an opportunity for them to make the run that they did. And that's really what I went off of. And Coach Janicki and his staff did an excellent job at that.
Yeah, well, I mean, pivoting to 2023 now, a new season, but like you said, one of Coach Janicki's big points that he referenced in the preseason form was to stay healthy. They had so many guys out in that semifinal game that you're trying to mix and match and find things that work. That late in the playoffs, it gets tough. So the big thing for them this year, staying healthy. What he really likes about this team is senior leadership. So I think he has a lot of experienced seniors now that they saw that run into the semifinals, and they fell short against Lena Winslow, but they were there, right? They've had that playoff football. And like we've talked about for a bunch of playoff teams, how many extra practices did that team get just out of that playoff run? Like that stuff is valuable. So he's talked a lot about, Coach Janicki talked about having a tremendous summer lifting. Their attendance was great, and this work ethic of this senior team. So you look at some of the seniors on this roster, Caleb Sanders, a running back and a linebacker. He really did the job on both sides of the football for him a year ago. Almost 1,000 yards, had 49 tackles, 13 total touchdowns back on the offensive side of the ball. Another senior, Micah Nelson, a running back, defensive back. He was a first-team DB, but he was one of the players that was out season-ending shoulder surgery at the end of the year. He's now going to be a 3-year starter. They have linemen like Ethan Bacher, Zach Schumann, both back, plus Grant Johnson, another senior. A lot of experience coming back on this Forreston team. This Forreston team on paper looks better than 5-4, right?
Oh, by far. I think I have in our preseason going 8-1, with the potential of possibly 7-2. You know, that Dupec game is one of those games that I could see going either way. And right now, I think I have Forreston favored in that, just due to the strength of schedule Dupec has at the end of their schedule. And despite that, you know, you take a guy like Ethan Bacher, for instance, and you heard how last season, you know, Keenan was very high on Ethan and his gameplay, and how they were going to move him to left tackle or right tackle, and how they were going to plan to utilize him in their offense and usually lead their running game behind him. And, you know, those are the things that, you know, are a strength for Forreston. You hear a lot of people are like, oh, Forreston's not anything. They're not anything. And then you look and they're like, well, let's see. They got a couple running backs back. They got 3 offensive linemen back, and they're going to do what Forreston does. You know, that's like Keenan was joking me. He goes, do you really need to know what my offense is? You should know it by now, you know? And he's right. I mean, they're going to come at you with the double wing. They're going to double dive you. They're going to lead you. They're going to run the buck sweeps, and they're not going to do anything flashy, and they're going to stick to their simple offense, and it works for them, and they do a great job at executing it.
Yeah, well, and absolutely, when you know, have that sort of offense, you know, and that sort of mentality, that leadership becomes valuable, that these kids are bought into it and they know what they're doing and they're ready to execute. What I thought was really interesting that Coach Janicki pointed out was they're really focused on special teams this year and improving their special teams play. Every loss they had last year included a kick return for a touchdown. So, I mean, that's a glaring point of emphasis then. So that's an interesting note that they're really trying to shore up special teams. You know, I think Forreston, like you said, I think they should be one of the teams that's absolutely a team to watch. I think 5-4 last year appeared to be an outlier at the end of the regular season, and they proved it, that maybe wasn't indicative of what they actually are. And I think this year they have a chance to kind of rewrite that and be a different team.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody throughout the state's overlooking that fact. I mean, obviously that semifinal run entering the playoffs as a 5-4 was definitely a staple point. They have the history and recent success behind them since 2014 with 3 state titles. I mean, outside of Arcola squeezing in that 1 state title, they're the only other team to win a state title outside of Lena Winslow.
Yeah.
And they've done it 3 times. And all 3 times they've had to go through Lena Winslow to get there as well. So, you know, there's different things there. And, you know, taking a look at some of the people on the talk show, or not the talk shows, but the talk forums and everything, you know, there's a lot of high regard for Forreston. And I see, you know, a lot of people putting out their preseason rankings, and granted, it doesn't mean anything, but it's still interesting to talk about. And there's a lot of people that definitely have Forreston ranked in their top 4 heading into the preseason of this year.
Yeah, I believe it. Yeah, I can absolutely see why. Well, let's move into another team that was in the Class 1A playoffs last year. The Fulton Steamers made it to the 1A quarterfinals. They finished with a record of 9-3. This year's team will look a little bit different than last year's team. This will be a fairly young team for the Steamers this season. Their success will be determined on how quickly those guys adjust and, you know, how much physicality they can bring to that varsity level football. That's, you know, what Coach Lower had pointed out in his notes to me. I think they will rely on some of that senior leadership that they have. One of those players being Balin Damehoff. He was making plays last year for him. He's back at a wide receiver position, big, tall wide receiver, 72 receptions, almost 1,000 yards, 13 touchdowns. They'll certainly rely on him for the big play ability. What else do you see in Fulton this year? What do you like?
Well, Coach Laura didn't really announce it on here, so I don't know if he is coming back. I would assume he would be, but Lucas Schroeder definitely stood out a lot last year in the run game, and I know he was only a junior last year, so I'm assuming he's back. He ran for 812 yards and 13 touchdowns for the Steamers last season. So, you know, that's one of the things that I think will definitely help balance Fulton off. In talking to Coach Lower, you know, obviously, you know, his look into this year is very similar to what it was last year. You know, he's like, well, we could be 5-4. We might be 7-2. We're just hoping that we're playing our best football by the time we hit the playoffs. And, you know, like you said, he's going to be a young team. He's going to have to rely on a lot of different things in order for the Steamers to have success. But having the success that they've had over the last 4 seasons now,
Yep.
they have a lot to build off on. And your incoming kids, and even, I mean, pretty much everybody that's here has experienced that success from freshman year through 7th grade, 6th grade. So they just want to be able to be the next class that continues that trend for the Steamers. And that's what Coach Laura is really hoping on and relying on, is that these seniors will continue to help guide the ship and keep the Steamers going forward.
Guide the ship. It's a pun, whether you meant it or not.
I did mean it, but
couple guys to look at. Interesting name to watch for. Sophomore Landon Lau, wide receiver, 6'4". Coach talked about him being a fast wide receiver. He's had a good summer for him. Somebody who has good speed and can stretch the field. Him alongside a Damehoff, and then senior Trevor Tiesman, also as a wide receiver, playing safety on the defensive side of the ball. They're going to be, the target for Dom Kramer, a junior quarterback stepping in, labeled as a dual threat quarterback with a strong arm. So, I think I like some of the pieces here that Fulton has, even if they're a younger team or maybe they haven't had as many starts under their belt. I think there's a lot of talent here.
Oh, definitely. I mean, even moving Dom Kramer to QB, which he's only going to be a junior, and I got to play against him this summer in baseball, and you can definitely see the size and athleticism that he does have. The very strong arm part, I've seen that firsthand. And he'll be a dual threat QB. So it gives the Steamers a lot of options. And then if you take a look a little bit further down, you have AJ Boardman there, who is going to be a running back and linebacker. And if anybody remembers, he was the quarterback at West Carroll for the last 2 years. So he transferred to Fulton right ahead of the baseball season, and he'll be there again this year for his senior year. And, there's options there. Now, they don't obviously intend to use AJ as a quarterback, but there's another option, to throw in another play. If you want to do a halfback option pass, it's available for them. So they got some pieces to work with and put some extra sauce, so to speak, into their play skills and their play calls.
Yeah. Another couple of names that Coach threw out there: Skylar Crooks, a running back who will be a junior, described as a fast, physical runner. Coach said he would get a lot of carries. Jacob Husingay, a tight end. I think I pronounced that right. Husingay.
Yeah.
All right. Got it. There we go. Josiah Held and Landon Boonstra on the line. So another couple guys to watch for there, sophomore and junior. And those, other two names were also juniors. So like we said, a little bit of a younger roster, but maybe it's just the way that Coach Lower described all of them. But I like what I see here in Fulton. Maybe he just sold his players really well, but I like what I'm seeing here.
Yeah. Like I said, you could sit here and say that Fulton might be down this year because of the lack of experience. And yet, like I said, you hope that you can build off of that. Last year, I'd project them to be 5-4, and they turned some heads when they upset Dupec over in Durand, and then they beat the teams that they were supposed to beat, and then they had that game against that school out of Michigan, and that was even a very close game that I felt that they should have won, had the opportunity to win, missed a field goal late, unfortunately, but it was sloppy playing conditions in that one. But overall, you could definitely, I felt last year after a couple weeks, I really felt that Fulton was probably the second best team in the state behind Lena Winslow. And some people, you can sit there and say that CPC was. I felt that CPC did a great job against Lena Winslow in the state championship game, which they did, but nobody really could stop Lena Winslow last year. And Fulton was one of those teams that put a good scare into Lena Winslow. They just couldn't come up with it all the way through, and that's been their nemesis so far since their arrival into the NUIC. Back-to-back quarterfinal losses to Lena Winslow. after, big routes in the regular season as well. So they know what they got to look forward to, and they have the ability to make some noise this year.
Yep, absolutely. All right, well, let's move ahead to the Galena Pirates. They were 4-5 a year ago, led by head coach Ed Freed. One trip to the playoffs since 2015. That came in 2021. So it's been a while since we've seen the top end Galena team year in and year out. This is a young team that has had some success at the sophomore level, but what do you see out of this Galena team this year?
Well, you got Jack Reese returning, Roman Romer, and Keaton Bauer. All three of those guys are big playmakers. Keaton Bauer is the last of the Bauer family, so you expect big things out of them. I haven't really been able to get a whole lot of information on Galena. Obviously, they were 4-5 last year. You could see them as potentially being a 5-4 team when you looked at them last year. This year I feel, going into it, not having much knowledge on them, I think I project them at 2-7 for the season, just because of the matchups and the teams that they have, and of course I expect teams like EPC, who they beat last year, and Stockton, who they beat last year, to be teams that are going to be on the rise as well, and what are able to contend with and potentially beat Galena. And that's probably why I got them a little bit lower, is due to lack of experience returning. I just don't have a whole lot of information on them. I mean, I'm not one of those guys that goes out. I don't go and watch the fresh off games. Ever since they changed them to Mondays, I don't have that time and availability to go watch fresh off football games. And to be quite honest, you see teams like a Forston every year. They're maybe 4-5 or 5-4 at the fresh soft level, but then you look at them at the varsity level the very next year, and they're going 8-1, 7-2, and they're making a quarterfinal or semifinal trip. So I don't put a whole lot of stock into fresh soft football, because so much changes between your sophomore and junior year, and
yep.
Things just shift, and the better programs always tend to be towards the top of the conference standings, and Galena was once the god of the NUIC, and they've fallen off, and they really just haven't gotten quite back on track yet.
Yep. Let's move right along. One of the teams that you'd mentioned maybe being on the rise, Eastland Pearl City. They were 3-6 a year ago, but they had a win over Dakota, and I felt like there was a few games that they were in and just maybe didn't quite get to the finish line. But this year's team, according to the coach, they'll be fast on defense. They have skilled players that are very talented. They're going to be young up front. Their offensive line will be 2 sophomores and 3 juniors. But some of that experience coming in the skill positions, I think there's a lot of weapons here for this Eastland Pro City team.
Oh, definitely. I mean, you got somebody not even listed on here in Jackson Kemple. He's going to be a junior. He's actually the returning leading rusher that they have.
Okay.
Brady Schweitzer definitely proved to be a big playmaker for EPC last year. Ethan Petta is a returning wide receiver. I'm not sure who they're going to have at quarterback. But you have options. There's a sophomore coming in who's not listed on here, Draven Zier. He's a very physical player. Will probably be getting some opportunities either on offense and or defense, and he could be a game changer. Obviously, you got another sophomore there in Will Burchin, who was a linebacker, actually led the NUIC in tackles last year as a freshman. And, they're definitely going to have some good skilled players. And like you said, yes, they're going to be fast. I think last year they proved that they were young, but that they were physical. And like you said, there was a couple games where you felt like they were in it. I mean, like you said, they took down Dakota.
Yep.
But there was a couple games where, they lost and they left you scratching your head. Like, how did you lose to that team by that big of a score? And, when you got young teams, you have growing pains, and I think that's where EPC was at last year. And I definitely feel that they're going to be a team that, and other teams are not going to overlook EPC. We we keep talking about the strength of the NUIC, and I think this is one of those years where you're going to see a lot of closer games. You know, Lena Winslow's for so long has been the stronghold over the conference. Granted, they're going to be very strong, but I think you're going to see some other teams that are finally going to be able to at least try their best to put up better competition against teams like Lena Winslow and Forreston.
Yeah. This Eastland Pearl City team is kind of one of those, teams where I look at a lot of games on their schedule of what I call those like X factor games, the game that could go either way, that really goes a long way in determining who's playoff bound and who's not. That race to 5 wins in a conference like the Northwest Upstate Illini, they're going to have a lot of games against the, Stockton, Galena. Those are those type of X factor games, I think. So I'm excited to see what Eastland Pearl City can do, because I think, like you said, there were some things you saw last year where they were right in it.
Well, and that goes back to that point. Obviously you're going to have some teams that are going to fall under expectations. Somebody's going to have to finish with 3 wins. Somebody's going to finish with 4 wins. Who is it going to be? And I mean, really, I feel like you could take the 2nd or 3rd team in the conference down to the 8th team in the conference. Outside of Lena Winslow, you could throw them all in a bag, dump the bag out, and put them in whatever order you want. And that's how I feel this season very well could be. A lot of people were chirping when I put Galena at 2-7. They're like, "Oh, you don't know what's coming, blah, blah, blah." Of course, I hear that every year.
From every team that you put down there.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, yeah.
And then more times than not, it tends to be the case that, hey, I had you at 2-7, you went 1-8. What the heck, So, but at the same token, I really feel this year is going to be a dog eat dog world in the NUIC, and it's going to be battle tested. And if you're coming out of it in the playoffs, I mean, Class 1A is still going to be pretty weak around the board, and we can definitely see another 5-4 team getting a good run in the playoffs once again, I feel. Every year you look at the Northwest Upstate Illini and you find teams that their record is not what they probably truly are, and the playoffs will come to prove that around the state. Well, before we jump into the rest of the Northwest Upstate Illini, let's take a minute to thank our sponsors. If you're looking for the perfect gift for your high school football player, check out Mathewson's Mini Helmets. They offer totally custom mini helmets or decals for your school. Find them on Facebook or on Twitter. We are thrilled to introduce the Mathewson's Mini Helmets Player of the Week Award this season. The best performance from our area will receive a custom View from the West mini helmet, customized to include the player's name and their school, along with, of course, the View from the West logo. So bound to be some players from 8-man football or Northwest Upstate Illini that are going to get one of those helmets. I'm pretty sure of that. So you can find Mathewson's Mini Helmets, again, on Facebook and on Twitter. If you also are looking for uniforms, Brink Sportswear offers totally custom, made-to-order football uniforms that allow coaches and athletic directors to take control of their brands. The uniforms are available in sublimated or tackle twill. They offer free digital mock-ups, free shipping on team orders, and free physical samples before you buy, so you know exactly what you're getting when you spend all that money, when you spend that your program's money. Uniform sets are available for $99 for sublimated, $120 for tackle twill. You can find them on Twitter, or you can head to brinksportswear.com. All right, let's keep going down the way here. The Northwest Upstate Illini continues with Dakota, playoff team from a year ago. They got a couple playoff wins, ended up in the state quarterfinals, ended up at 7-5. They do find themselves with a new head coach. Eric Diddich steps in to take over coaching responsibilities. That's a late switch. Dan Sheets was relieved of his duties. He is out. There are news stories out there. You can go ahead and read about it. Tough situation in Dakota. Eric Diddich steps in. What do you know about Coach Diddich? It seems like he has a good resume. I mean, to step in, he's been with the program, and he's been around football for quite a while. Yeah, he's from East Dubuque originally. Played at Wahlert Catholic in Dubuque, and then he played 4 years at NIU, started 3 of those 4 years on the defensive line. So he's got experience in Division I football. Last year, he was the defensive coordinator for Dakota as well. So he was definitely a part of help guiding this team to the quarterfinal run. And, he's a very intense guy, demands perfection and has expectations that, you have to be doing certain things a certain way in order to find success. I mean, it's typical of most coaches, especially one with the level and caliber of um, player that he was. You expect those things, and it's going to probably take a little bit getting used to, because like we talked about last year, we're in that age where some kids that are going out for football are a little bit softer than what they were in years past. And when you get a coach that expects and demands certain performances, you tend to see some kids decide, this isn't for me anymore. So we'll see how it pans out. But I think the outlook for Dakota with Diddish in place is going to be pretty good. I think that we can definitely see Dakota right in the mix of the thick of the NUIC again, fighting for an opportunity and make it back to the playoffs.
They were a team that kind of surprised us last year, and they kind of jumped on the radar with that big win, like we talked about, over Forreston in a real back and forth great game, one of the games of the year last year. But the following week, they kind of stubbed their toe and they lost to that Eastland Pearl City team that finished at 3-6. So, they ended up making the playoffs. They had 2 playoff wins. So the program is definitely trending in the right direction. You're familiar with some of the players out there. What do you see coming back? What excites you? What do you like?
Well, I mean, Dakota returns a lot of their line. You have Noah Wenzel, Kamari Spates, and Avery Bowers all returning on the line. Braxton Niedermeyer's returning at tight end, which he'll be utilized in a receiver role at times, but as a blocking tight end a lot too. I think you're going to see Dakota kind of transition back to a triple option type offense with the ability to throw out of it. They're going to move Nolan Mayberry to quarterback. Last year he was a receiver, started on the defense at defensive back, so he'll return to that position. You're going to see Connor Matthews take over the fullback responsibilities. Last year it belonged to Tommy Bowman. Connor did get some carries last year. He had 47 attempts for 272 yards, but he's definitely going to see more of the bulk this year. Tristan Alexander had some playing time last year as well as a junior. He's going to be taking the bulk of the halfback carries this year as well. So I think you're going to find a good mix there, and I wouldn't be surprised to see them use Nolan as a dual threat quarterback, able to run. He was used to play baseball, went out for track last year, so he's got good speed. Is really a good playmaker, very heady, has a good football IQ. So, having that transition to have him at the quarterback position has been huge. He's been one of the biggest leaders I've seen on the team this year so far as well. So, when you have that senior leadership, obviously good things can happen. A lot of these guys, like I said, they were on last year's team. So they have that success, and then they've seen success in other sports as well, whether it be wrestling or baseball. So they want to continue to grow on that. So hopefully everything works out in their favor.
Like we just referenced with Eastland Pearl City, this Dakota team, again, seems like one of those X Factor teams that we're going to see several matchups that, kind of toss up games that, like you said, throw them in a bag and just roll it out and see what you get. They're toss up games, and those games will go a long way in determining who sits where in the NUIC standings. Well, let's keep rolling down the list. West Carroll struggled last year at 0-9. Michael Bixler takes over for his second stint at West Carroll. Kyle, what do you know about Coach Bixler? And, he's coming in here as a head coach for a second time.
Yeah, he was with Dakota in their first two state championship runs as an assistant coach under Jerry Lano. So he was with Dakota in '05 and '07. Ended up going down to West Carroll where he was head coach there for 4 years. And then he left and um, now he's back. I can't remember exactly where he went. I think he went somewhere, I believe it was in Iowa. He went when he left West Carroll the first time, but now he's back to take over West Carroll after they had that opening here at the end of the regular season as that concluded. Um, and there's a lot of things. West Carroll obviously went 0-9 last year, coming back after sitting out a year, and they were a very young team, and they're still going to be a young team this year, but they are going to have another year under their belts. As we mentioned, they're one of their biggest playmakers was AJ Boardman, who transferred to Fulton, so they're going to have to rely on some younger guys to take over. And Roger LeBourne is one of those guys that he got a lot of playing time as a freshman last year. He'll be a sophomore this year. And there's high expectations for Roger, and the athleticism that he has hopefully can help guide West Carroll into the win column. They're very confident that they should be able to get some wins under their belt. Obviously, they'll have Connor Townsend back, who led the team in tackles last year, and you have Aaron Becker back as well, who led the team in receiving yards with 294 yards and 3 touchdowns. So, some key pieces to work with, but there's still a lot to do in order to come back from an 0-9 season, especially in a conference as we continue to state. We're expecting a lot of teams that can be able to play for potential playoff opportunities.
Yeah, I think, you named, a couple guys there that, coming back, a leading tackler and a wide receiver and, LeBourne at quarterback, but also, you got to look at how much depth you have on a line and, what's your defense look like, outside of the leading tackler. I think, yeah, there's a lot of questions that come with being in the NUIC that where can you find those victories? We wish them the best of luck and, hopefully that they can bounce back because last year was tough and no one wants to go 0-9. So, I think like you mentioned, they have a couple pieces there that, it's nice to have that experience back, regardless of even if it didn't work out last year, you still have that varsity game speed. You've seen it, so we'll see what they can do this year in 23. Well, let's head to Stockton, 3-6 a year ago, led by head coach Sean Downey. What Coach Downey likes is a great group of seniors. They've put in the hard work and are trying to build this program back to what people expect Stockton to be. He thinks they have a nice mix of athletes and linemen, and they're hoping that they can find a little bit of depth in there. What have you seen? What have you heard out of Stockton?
Well, obviously, they were 3-6 last year. To a lot of people, that was an underperformance. That's part of how Sean Downey became the head coach. Previous head coach Matt Lightson, whether it be resigned on his own, forced to resign, whatever that storyline may have been, either way, he stepped down, and Sean Downey was on his staff last year as the offensive coordinator. He has taken over. Those that don't know, Sean Downey was the offensive coordinator for EPC during their big years, including their 2014 state championship run. And one of the biggest things that he added to his coaching staff this year was Randy Ashey to his staff, who was the head coach that he was the offensive coordinator under at EPC for a decade. So those two have done a lot of work together. And one of the big things for Stockton, and you can see it on social media, is they're definitely hitting the weight room and they're making huge, fast gains in the weight room. And a lot of that can be credited to having Randy Ashey on staff. He's brought a whole different weightlifting program that I'm sure he's learned through being close with ISU, having his son play for the Redbirds, and then, of course, being in the mix with things with EPC for a decade as well. He's a big guy himself, so there's a lot of things he knows, and he's definitely been pushing that with Stockton. And like I said, the results are showing in the weight room, so they're very excited with a lot of these guys, like Tanner Guile and Carl Hubb at running back. Michael Haas is a big dude that's going to be on the offensive and defensive lines. Same with Wesley Logeman. So, there's a lot of excitement here. And to be quite honest, in talking with some people from Stockton, they're not going to be satisfied if they're going 4-5. Their goal is to be 5-4, 6-3, and in the thick of things and back in the playoffs where they feel Stockton football belongs.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be fun to see because, a fall Saturday in Stockton is a great playoff atmosphere. I've been there several times. I do enjoy going out to Stockton for a football game. And getting back to, the Eastland Pearl City connection, when Sean Downey was leading that offense, they were electric. Obviously, they won state championship. They were a dynamic offense. So that is something really interesting to follow. And with having Coach Ashe in there, like you said, I think that's a great connection to have for the Stockton programs to see where they can end up. Again, one of those teams that it's going to be a lot of toss-up games throughout their season. And if they can come out on top of several of them, they're going to be a playoff team again. So last but certainly not least, in the 11-man Northwest Upstate Illini, Dupec, the Dupec Rivermen. They were 8-3 a year ago. They lost in the second round to Reed Custer 24-6, led by Tyler Hoffman. Coach Hoffman got back to us with his preseason form, says they have a good amount of depth at their skill positions. And if their line can mesh together, he believes that'll be a big strength as well. As you've seen, this program is kind of continually building, and they've kind of become, it's kind of funny that as you watch, Dupec's kind of become a program that's kind of grown up around our podcast, right? Like when they were first starting to build pieces, we were kind of just starting the podcast. So I feel like as we've gone on, they've continued to become a mainstay. What do you see this year in this Dupec team?
Well, it's kind of funny because Dupec with their co-op, and I say this a lot, but they remind me of EPC when they first went into a co-op. They had to go through 2 bumpy years, taking losing programs together and creating a winning environment. Dupec did the exact same thing, and now they're benefiting off the fruits of that labor. And I agree with Coach Hoffman's assessment. Needs to improve their offensive line. I feel that that's definitely an area of concern. They lost the most amount of starters there. The skill guys are definitely going to be there. You got Jalen Nowd back. You got Cooper Hoffman at quarterback. You're going to have a couple guys like Drew Williams and Brody Black and Nathan Folk. Hopefully he's coming back after having a broken ankle. So the skill guys are there. They're going to have team speed. The line's going to be the biggest thing for me. You got Jackson Diedrich back at tight end. He put on some spectacular catches as a sophomore last year. Expect big things out of him again this year as a junior. But if they can't get protection around Hoffman, you're gonna find Dupec having some struggles. And taking a look at how they're changing the landscape again, another program that has a lot of buy-in to the weight room, getting a lot of commitment to that weight room. So, those things tend to take care of themselves, so to speak. So, one of the things I did notice though is their line looks like they may be smaller than what we're used to seeing in years past out of Dupec, which could bode to being a little bit more of an athletic line at the same time. And, excuse me, we've seen those teams where their lines aren't very big, but if they become athletic and explosive, that turns a whole different game around too, especially with a dual threat QB like Hoffman back there. I mean, Cooper's game's definitely different than what his older brother Hunter's game was. Hunter was one of those pocket type passers. Cooper is one of those guys. He's looking, reading, 1, 2, run.
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
There's a lot of coaches that do feel that, hey, Dupek's right there in the mix now. They're no longer, well, they haven't been a slouch for quite a while.
Yep.
But, they're, like you said, since you guys have started your podcast, we've already seen Dupek win a conference title. They were there in the thick of things last year, going 7-2. They put up a great game against Reed Custer in the second round of the playoffs, who narrowly had a loss to Byron in the quarterfinals the very next week. So they're right there knocking on that door. And, like I said, they've always been that offensive line away from being really, really good because their skill guys are right there. And this is one of those years where they might be able to make that change.
Yep. Well, that wraps up our NUIC 11-man coverage. So, Kyle, I'll put you on the spot. I know you already sent out the tweet with the chalkboard on it, so you've already kind of given your predictions. Who's on top? Who finishes the year on top?
Well, I mean, I got to go with the team that's been on top for a while, and that's Lena Winslow. I mean, outside of Coach Aaron, who, states that, he could see Dupek or Forston win it and everybody else is chasing them or whatever it was that he said, however he said it. Either way, everybody else says it's Lena Winslow's conference until somebody steps up to beat them.
Yep.
They're the kings on top, and that's truly what it is. And that's one of the things. Coach A knows that he's got the target on his back. Everybody across the state knows that the target's on Lena Winslow's back, and you hear him talk about things like it's a lot of pressure put on the kids and whatnot. But I think that they're that program that kind of welcomes that pressure, so to speak, because they know that, hey, if we're not going to do what we need to do to execute and win games, then we expect to get our blocks knocked off. So, Lena Winslow is my pick to win the conference.
All right, I will agree. Lena Winslow is also my pick to win the conference. But maybe the harder question, who finishes second?
That was a tough one. I definitely tossed that one around for quite a bit, and I couldn't pick whether I wanted to go with Forston or Dupek. And like I said, you take a look at Dupek's schedule at the end of the year. They got a gauntlet. They go Lena Winslow, Fulton, Forston, and then Belleville Althoff.
Oh, jeez. Yeah.
If Dupek can come out of that with a 3-1 record, to me, that's going to be absolutely outstanding. And they would go 8-1 at that point, provided that they don't have a hiccup earlier in the year. They're going to get a good test right out of the gates with Stockton at home. Okay. So that will be a very good game, I feel. I do have Dupek picked to win that game. But right now, I think Forston has the ability to upend Dupek because I feel that Forston, as we talked about, they have a much stronger line coming back with more experience on the line. And we all know in high school football, especially small school football, offensive and defensive lines win your games for you.
So I'm gonna kind of like tiptoe around the question. My second place team, I agree. I look at Forston or Dupek. But a team I'll put on the radar is Fulton. I think that there's potential there, that there's some unknowns, right? But if those unknowns, I think, really show up, and if they're put in the right spots, I think that if they execute, I think that's a team, like you said last year, they ended up with a better record than you anticipated or that you expected. So it's another team I'll toss out there. So that's a non-answer answer. I'm not really going to pin it down, but all right. Well, before we jump into our 8-man football talk, let's once again thank our sponsors. We got to thank the Cupcake Cartel, gourmet cupcakes made to order, over 40 flavors, including wedding cake, lemon blueberry, strawberry milkshake, or snickerdoodle. Perfect for weddings, birthdays, fundraisers, showers, or even, hear me out, cupcakes for a view from the West listening party, right? We could try that. If you, Kyle agrees. Yep, there you go. You can find the Cupcake Cartel on Facebook. We want to thank them for their support.
The Quad City's first and only fantasy football show, For Fantasy's Sake, has you all covered when it comes to all of your fantasy football needs. The guys come to you live every Sunday morning during the football season from 10 to 11:30. They've got the best analysis, rankings, DFS, and gambling advice between the Rock and Mississippi Rivers. So tune into For Fantasy's Sake every Sunday during the football season from 10 to 11:30 a.m. on Facebook and YouTube.
All right, let's make the pivot to 8-man football. Kyle, when it comes to 8-man football, the teams from the Northwest Upstate Illini have certainly made a name for themselves in 8-man football over the years. But if we're starting the 8-man conversation this year, we have to start with West Central. What they did last year was remarkable. They ran their way to a state championship, literally ran at the buzzer over Polo in one of the maybe wildest finishes you'll ever see. Caden Drosty had a year that it's unforgettable, kind of the way he put them on the map and the way he literally carried them. But this is a new year. This is a new look for Jason Kirby. You start looking around, they have returning starters such as Blake Cole on the line, Hunter Schrader at tight end, Isaiah Stevenson at fullback. But, just what they did last year was remarkable. What do they do for an encore? What can they do? I think what's really interesting is that this group, according to Coach Kirby, they're really motivated to take that ownership of their own. They know that the group last year was uber talented and that they've graduated and they're ready to jump in and make a name for themselves. That's exciting for a program like West Central to kind of have that buy-in and have that desire to want to take the next step. That target on your back. That's what you talked about with Lena Winslow. That's exciting for West Central to have that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like Coach Kirby stated, ever since they've joined 8-man, they've really been right there. You take a look at the COVID year; they went undefeated that year. They had a big win against Polo that year as well to finish 6-0 on the year. And then the next year, they were ousted by Polo in the playoffs. So last year was kind of fitting where Polo had the lead with 24 seconds left in the game or whatever it
Crazy.
was.
Yep.
The West Central's facing 4th down and 26 or whatever it was, and basically you got one play and you got to give it to your best player. And Drosty runs literally through 5 guys to make it to the end zone for the win.
He would not be denied is the only way to describe it.
Yeah, I mean, I remember talking to him about that play, and he was running towards the Polo sideline.
Yeah.
Realized that he could not step out of bounds, and he just made a right turn to Albuquerque and went uphill, and that was it. And that's all he remembers. And that's about what it looked like.
Yep. That's amazing. It's incredible.
So, I mean, as you said, he was a phenomenal player. I don't want to say generational player, but he had a talent, a speed that you don't see every single day. And, a playmaker behind a relatively big size line for West Central. I felt that if you put that team together in 11-man football, I think they would have been dangerous in Class 1A last year as an 11-man team as well. The only question mark there would have been overall depth at that point, but up front and the skills, they were physical, they were fast, and I think they could have made some noise in Class 1A last year. And like you said, it was no surprise to see them run through 8-man. The only question marks that had last year were, how strong is their regular season schedule? And, we were getting a lot of criticism where we had them ranked number 4, number 5 in state. And, slowly as the season went on, you continued to see them move up because then they started getting that part of their schedule where they're getting some wins against some better teams, Ridgewood being one of them, where they just knocked the socks off of them. And by that time, we'd already seen Amboy go down. We watched Polo go down. Milledgeville went down. And then eventually MCP went down. And that left West Central as the only choice to be at number 1 because they were still going on at the pace that they had, and it was definitely an amazing year. How do they rebound this year? It's going to be tough, I think. You lost a lot of talent. It's great that they have a lot of motivation to get back. They have those three guys in Blake, Hunter, and Isaiah to rely on with experience, but we're talking 8-man football and three guys. Yes, that can definitely help, but you still got 5 holes to fill, and they're going to have a tough time. I mean, you replace a very good quarterback. You got the halfback and the fullback position. Even though Isaiah's there to step in, he was not the starting fullback last year. So, there's definitely some areas where they need to see some vast upside in early in the season, and they're definitely going to have their hands full. I think Ridgewood is going to be a team that's going to be towards the top of 8-man, and they're going to have to face them in divisional play. And then you take a look at some of their games outside of that, and they have Pawnee, which we think will be good.
Yep.
And they have to play MCP again. And people down in Scioto think West Prairie is going to have a better team than they had last year. So they definitely got some games on their schedule that are going to give them some fits with the team that they have this year.
Yeah. Well, let's keep going down the list here. The team you referenced in Ridgewood, who will be one of their divisional opponents, they finished 9-3 last year. Head coach Pat Elder did a great job of kind of getting this team, really on board and really jumping into 8-man football, and they showed well for themselves. They have 5 players with significant experience at key positions, and coach is hoping that their leadership helps some of their younger players. He mentioned that they will need to develop a little bit in offensive and defensive line, just with some inexperience. But with some of the playmakers they have coming back, Preston Moriarty at running back and defensive back, we called him out a lot last year. Riley Couture at quarterback, and Roy Sandberg at running back and linebacker. Those are some offensive weapons for him. On the defensive side of the ball, Taylor Schnook at linebacker, Moriarty at defensive back, like we referenced. You have Connor McKeague and Roy Sandberg again over there on the defensive side of the ball. So they got some playmakers back, and this was a team that kind of jumped on the scene last year in 8-man.
They jumped on the scene. They went 8-1 in the regular season. They had that loss to West Central, which we kind of expected, and it was a big loss. And then when they got in the playoffs, we all expected Polo to meet them in the second or in the quarterfinals, which happened. And I think we were all kind of shocked that it was a closer game than I think any of us really anticipated, which spoke volumes to Coach Elder and getting his team prepared to, be there and where they needed to be playing wise, And I saw, Coach Elder in Milledgeville last year for a game on their day off when Milledgeville was playing West Central. So, he was able to get some additional scouting in that probably helped them also have that additional success. And like you said, with Moriarty, Couture, and Sandberg back, that's definitely a lot of offensive weapons that we heard a lot about last year, as you stated. And then on the defensive side, McKeague did a great job at nose guard last year. You expect the same things this year. And then having Moriarty and Sandberg at defensive back and linebacker, it's almost like Polo with Solto and Avery Grenoble,
Yeah.
So you get some key players at key positions. You have the opportunity to make some noise. And, I feel that this is one of those years where Ridgewood can definitely be one of those teams that is in the mix of things with the Amboys, the Polos, the Millegevilles, the MCPs, and the West Centrals for that state ranking, being towards the top and competing for a state championship.
Yeah, absolutely. They're a team that I would peg to be near the top or at the top of their division, and a team that we'll be talking about in the 8-man playoffs. Let's move down the standings there in the Central Division here in 8-man. Galva. The Galva Wildcats were 2-7 a year ago. Head coach Mark Jeffrey says they return a lot of starters. He's mentioned they've really done a good job in the weight room. and they have improved their speed work. So they've been working on a lot of stuff this offseason. They return Caden Rochelle, tight end, defensive end. Alec Gustafson's a junior. He'll be at quarterback and a safety. And Jared O'Brien's a senior linebacker and offensive lineman. So some pieces there for Galva. But like we referenced, they'll be, they're in a tough, battle with Ridgewood and with West Central and a few other teams in the mix there in their division as well. See if they can make a little bit of a push and, get above that 2-win mark. Well, let's move down the way in 8-man, and let's move into the north side of the divisions in 8-man football. Here's where your real bread and butter is, Kyle. Here's where a lot of teams. Let's get into the Milledgeville Missiles. 7-4 last season, advanced to the quarterfinals, lost to West Central, led once again by head coach Jason Roble. They'll need to replace some big pieces, but they also have Connor Nye back, and it feels like he's been there for 10 years. So he's a good weapon to have if you got a guy coming back.
Yeah, I mean, he's only thrown for 2,906 yards and 53 touchdowns to just 10 interceptions over the last 2 years with a 57.6% completion percentage. So very good. And then offensively, or running the ball, he's ran for over 1,300 yards over the past 2 years with another 23 touchdowns. So very explosive player. Over in the years past, they haven't really used him much on the defensive side. I think for them this year, they're probably going to have to utilize him more on the defensive side. So he's going to have to play both ways, I feel, for Milledgeville to continue to have success. But at the same time, they're going to have to, somewhat be a little bit careful on how they use him, because you lose him and you're going to lose a lot of your offense in a hurry. But, having Connor Johnson returning and Micah Tom Smith, those guys are going to be some key playmakers that we've seen somewhat last season. Not very high on a lot of their stats, but, they played some significant minutes, and they're going to have to definitely improve and pick up their play and responsibilities for Milledgeville to have success. And then you got Spencer Nye in there, who's going to have more opportunities to get more playing time as well. So another guy that they do have coming back too that's not stayed on here is Colton Wilk. He'll be another staple along with Bryce McKenna as well for Milledgeville. So, a couple names that Coach Roble kind of left off here, but definitely guys that have a lot of experience, 3-year starter type experience that definitely makes Milledgeville look very seasoned compared to a lot of teams.
Yep, absolutely. You got to figure that with Connor Nye leading the way and with some of these pieces coming back, they'll be in the mix again. They'll be in the conversation for one of the better 8-man teams, a playoff type of team. Another team that you expect to be right there in the mix, Polo Marcos were 9-3 a year ago. The semifinal loss to West Central. I don't think we need to go into it again because I'm not sure the Polo fans want to hear about it again, but we know it was a tough loss. They return a lot of good depth, numerous players that have, dedicated themselves to stepping in as starters. I'm impressed with, they have a lot of experience returning on the line from last year. Jacob Monaco, Alex Albano, Landon Brooks, Nathan Yingling, Logan Nelson. That's a lot of line behind Brock Soltau, who comes back, who's done dynamic, is a dynamic playmaker himself. So there's a lot of pieces for this Polo team coming back for sure.
Yeah, I think a lot of people expect Polo to be right there competing with, Amboy for potentially the top 2 spots to start off the preseason state rankings. And how could you not expect it? I mean, they've only won 2 state championships and a hard semifinal loss last year that kept them away from a potential another state championship. And like you said, Soto was the man last year for the Marcos, and he's got to be again this year. Comes into this season with 3,889 career yards rushing and 63 touchdowns. So as far as the NUIC presence in 8-man football, he's already the all-time leading rusher in 8-man play for teams out of the NUIC, and he hasn't even set foot on the field for a senior year yet. So that speaks volumes for Brock Solto and what he's done for Polo over the last 2 years. And they're going to utilize him at the quarterback position, which is something they found later in the season where they started to have more success, was just the direct snap to him and then utilize him as basically a running quarterback. But at the same time, he was able to put up a couple passes here and there to help offset that a little bit. Threw for 202 yards and 4 touchdowns last year. So, good things there, but they're definitely going to need to have more than just Brock, and that's where D'Lo Fernandez comes in. And I think there was a couple times last year after Grenoble went down with his injury where D'Lo definitely stood out quite a bit. He ended up finishing with 525 yards and 5 touchdowns in the later half of the season in Avery Grenoble's absence. So, they're going to need that to be another contributing factor for them to have success. They're not going to be able to rely just on Brock running the ball the entire game. Although I will say, like you said, that offensive line coming back, expect Brock to be on QB keepers a lot. I mean, heck, we saw it work for Decatur Lutheran last year with Leighton Miller. So, you got Brock Solto doing exactly what Leighton Miller did last year.
Yeah, I think that's a recipe for success with the experience you have on that line coming back. So certainly Polo will be a team that will be in that mix. Like you said, we've always come to expect that. It'll be a tough division, and there's a lot of talented teams and a lot of talent in this 8-man division when you're talking about Milledgeville and Polo and Amboy. If we're talking about the Amboy Clippers, they were the state runner-up a year ago. They went 10-3 on the year. They only lost one senior off of last year's state runner-up. Man, you talk about all the pieces being in place. This is the team that has all the pieces in place.
Well, and like we said at the end of last year, when we finished up with our postseason stuff, we ended the year stating that Amboy should be the number 1 team when the preseason state rankings come out in 2023, with the fact that all they lost was Tucker Lindenmeyer. And you have Eddie Jones filling back in, who got a lot of that experience as a sophomore last year when Tucker was gone. So he knows how to run the offense. He knows what to expect. He's got that varsity play under his belt already. So that nerve system is pretty much gone outside of, just the anticipated levels of getting hit by another team again. But, he's got that experience under his belt. He's got good running backs behind him with Quinn Leffelman and Landon Welchel. And Welchel really was the one that stormed on the scene. He wasn't somebody that was really thought about early in the season because, you had Leffelman, you had Brennan Blaine being utilized as a running back there early in the season, and at the time they still had Kai Cook before he had to leave the team for personal reasons. And Welchel just came in out of nowhere and ended up running for almost 1,500 yards and 18 touchdowns. So that was a huge jolt for Amboy and really a pleasant surprise for the Clippers. And it's a great place for them to be. And, having Blaine and Leffelman there, and then you add in Welchel, you got a killer combination. And be quite honest, that's a big 1-2-3 punch when you take a look at it. And it gives Coach Payne a lot of options to do things differently. I mean, again, they have the opportunity to put some different plays into their pocket that they could utilize and kind of throw you off guard with that kind of speed and power.
Yeah, I think, we've talked about so much talent and so many, good football teams in this one division, but I think Amboy's got to stand out above the rest just because of all of the playmakers they have back and because of what they did last year. I mean, like you said, they were a team we'd pegged at the end of last year to be a team to watch, and they're right here. Now it comes down to executing, right? I mean, it's like we talked about in the Northwest Upstate Illini, the 11-man, portion, that every Friday you got to show up and you got to be ready to, make the plays and prove it. And so I think that's what's really exciting about this division of 8-man football is there's a lot of good teams, and Amboy is going to be tested. They're not going to be able to coast through their division.
No, and that's one of the changes that we see, though, too. Obviously we recently found out that Leighton Miller transferred from Decatur Unity Christian, which was Decatur Lutheran last year, transferred out. So that's going to change that week 1 game quite significantly. That was going to be a game we thought would be number 1 versus number 2 to kick off the season, and now it doesn't look like it might necessarily be that way, but still Amboy can't go into that game overlooking Unity Christian. But then you take a look, they do have some good games early on, but really it gets tough as you hit week 5 with Ridgewood. Then you got Milledgeville in week 6, and then you got Polo looming in week 9. So, I think they're going to have a lot of time to get some success under the belts early in the season, and they'll be able to survive some hiccups. And hopefully by the time they hit week 5 with Ridgewood, they have that all worked out. We can see them playing and exceeding their expectations and level of play.
Yeah. Well, a couple more teams we'll run through in this division of 8-man football, and that'll pretty much wrap us up. Let's talk a little bit about the Orangeville Broncos. They had kind of an interesting offseason where it was a potential co-op with Ackwen, and then Ackwen is not able to field a team. They weren't able to form the co-op, and Ackwen's not able to field a team. So Orangeville's on their own. What do we know about their numbers, and then what's their situation look like?
Number-wise, they're going to be all right. They'll be able to field a team. Obviously, they're going to have a new coach in Scott Jones. I have not been able to get in contact with Coach Jones, so I really don't know much of what he has to offer and how his offensive or defensive schemes will look. However, they do return Blake Fulgate at running back, and Blake did run for 1,818 yards and 25 touchdowns last year. So they have that to kind of fall back on. And excuse me.
Bless you.
Oh, man. And then they have Cody Worth back at quarterback too. So they're going to have some options there as far as QB and running back with experience. You have Gavin Roth back as well. Last year they tried to utilize him as a fullback. That didn't really go as well as they thought it might. I would expect to see him back on the offensive line this year. So, there's still going to be a question mark in my opinion. But they should be a little bit better than what we expect. You have Blake Tyrell, who should be a key contributor coming back, Adam Setterstrom, and Nathan Brinkmeyer as well. So, I mean, like I said, they got some guys there that can make some noise and potentially help guide Orangeville back up from their dismal season that they had last year. But definitely a hard time for them having to go through some coaching changes so quickly after just having a state runner-up 2 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. They're not too far removed from, a lot of success. So we'll see what they can do. And like we've talked about, it's a tough division. They're in a tough spot, with the 8-man programs that surround them in their division. So one more team to cover in this North division of 8-man football, in North 2, I should say. River Ridge, they were 4-5 a year ago. Head coach Doug Nicholas believes athleticism will be one of their strengths. He says they're focused on blocking better on offense and getting off the field defensively. What do you know? What do you like about River Ridge this year?
Well, one of the things about River Ridge is something that we saw all season long, whether it be on the football field, the basketball court, or the baseball diamond. They have some athletes and they have some speed. Playing better and staying focused on blocking is going to be huge. There was a lot of times last year where, if they would have just stayed with their blocks, they were a couple steps away from breaking a touchdown run. But, like Coach Nicholas states, they had some opportunities that just went awry because they did not finish plays out. And if they can do that, especially having George Winter and Seth Nicholas back there, they have the guys that can break loose and take the ball all the way and create a lot of spark and offense for River Ridge. And it's just one of those things where you hope that all of that can come to fruition, and really taking a look at where River Ridge is at. They were 4-5 last year. They had an outside chance to get into the playoffs, just missed it. And this year we're talking about the Wildcats potentially being a top 10 team in 8-man football this year. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about them, kind of being towards the bottom of the top 10, but still breaking in the top 10 nonetheless. And looking at their schedule, they're going to open up with some doozies right out of the gate with Milledgeville and Amboy. So, but then they have a couple favorable games in week 3 and 4 before they have to hit Polo again in week 5. And then they definitely finished the last half of their season with quite a few games that I feel are winnable games for River Ridge, provided that they can definitely improve upon that offensive line play. And then again, like Coach Nicholas says, you got to get off the field defensively. They got to be able to have that physical presence on defense, come up and hit you, and get you to punt the ball or make the turnovers happen to give you the ball back on offense.
Yeah. I mean, if they're going to be a team that, makes some noise, they're going to have to earn it. Because like we talked about, they'll run into some tough teams along the way. But George Winters, Seth Nicholas, Ben Richmond, Damon Dittmer, some names to watch for with River Ridge. All right. One more team to cover on the 8-man ranks, and then we'll wrap this one up. Ashton Franklin Center. They were 6-4 a year ago. They lost in the first round to Milford Cisna Park. Ben Mershon as the head coach out there. They are in the North 1 division. So they're along with Alden Hebron, Kirkland Hiawatha, Rockford Christian Life, and South Beloit. So they're kind of the one NUIC team that's kind of out on their own with a few other teams there in the North 1 division. But what do you see from AFC this year, Kyle?
Well, they lose a lot of talent off of last year's team that made the playoffs for the first time since 2005. So that they're going to have a lot of holes to fill. By the looks of it, based off of the information I have, they should be returning their 2 best wide receivers in Lane Koning and Zane Murphy. The problem is who you're going to have throw to them. The quarterback that they had last year was a senior, threw for a lot of yards. They basically ran an all-out passing attack style offense. So, have not been – AFC's been one of those teams that's been hard to get information from. I spent a lot of time last year speaking with their athletic director, Tracy Gittleson, just to get more information because, she was doing her job of trying to promote her team. And likewise, they deserved it. I mean, they made it to the playoffs and they did some surprising things, but they got thumped there in the first round by Milford Cisna Park. And last year MCP was one of those teams that we felt could compete for a state championship, and they came up short, but they definitely were a powerhouse team and really have been ever since they've been an 8-man. So it's no surprise there either. But as far as AFC, I think we're going to watch them take a step backwards this year. I think when you take a look at that North 1 division, you're talking about Hiawatha being at the top or at least second to the top. I feel that they'll be at the top, and then you got South Beloit there too. And a lot of people are really looking at South Beloit having a huge improvement this year. So AFC schedule, doesn't bode very well either. I mean, they got non-conference games with River Ridge, Amboy, Pawnee. So those are some teams that, like I said, we expect those teams to be state ranked and talked about being in the state rankings all throughout the course of the season. And then you still have some other games that like South Beloit's another one, and then Hiawatha as well. So, I mean, that's 5 games right there. We're already talking about AFC probably being on the negative side of the win column. So, their work's cut out for them. Anything's possible. You just got to be able to show up and play. But like I said, they got a lot of holes to fill. They had a lot of senior talent that's no longer there.
Yep. Well, there you go, Kyle. That's the 8-man. That's the NUIC 11-man. We've covered all the teams in our area, I believe. So, yeah, thank you for joining us this week. Are you ready? Are you all, you got all your notes? Obviously, you're ready to go here.
I'm getting ready for sure. I did have all my notes ready to go. I haven't really been too active here, but starting to get there definitely.
Well, you just got back from like a baseball Midwest tour, right? I should have talked to you about that in the beginning.
Yeah, sure did. It was awesome. Was able to pick up the entire National League Central in 3 different cities, so that was a lot of fun.
That's amazing. Yeah, and you made a stop at the Field of Dreams at the end of it. So
sure did. You got to stop at the Field of Dreams every
That's
now
awesome.
and then.
Yeah, that's great. That was cool. I was following along on Twitter. That's an excellent road trip, man. So
it was definitely a blast. It was something that we needed to do to kind of unwind.
Yep.
Put an end to baseball season, although I really not. I got a lot of things going on with weightlifting and open gyms and whatnot. But outside of that, yes, we're ready for football season. Vacation's over. Football season officially started yesterday. So
yep.
Let's go.
Yep.
We got 17 weeks of this. Let's do it.
Awesome. Well, I'm ready. And of course, we'll cap off the season. Not the season. We'll cap off the regular season, hopefully once again at your house for a playoff preview show, which will go live on YouTube. If that's the plan again, I think 3 years running now, I'll plan to be out there. So
that's absolutely the plan. And, we already got that date marked for October 21st at 7 p.m. So
I love it. Well, if anyone, we've been listening to this whole time, follow, if you're not already, follow NUIC Football at NUIC Football on Twitter. You can find NUIC Football on Facebook as well. A source of tons of great information about all the teams we've just talked about throughout the season. So, Kyle, thank you for being here because, Mitch never made it. So he's having a great time in Dallas. So he missed out on this one.
He sure did. I think he knew he wasn't going to make it, but hey, I appreciate you having me on. I always enjoy collaborating with you guys, and it's always fun being able to talk football.
Yep, I love it. So Mitch will be back later this week for our Lincoln Land Conference preview. That should come out on Friday. We kind of got a day behind here. It was a whole thing. Mitch was traveling. I ended up with a stomach flu, so I wasn't going to pull a Michael Jordan flu game and try to podcast through it. It wasn't going to work, so I had to call the audible. But anyway, we'll get the Lincoln Land Conference preview later this week. Next week will be the Three Rivers Conference. Then down the way, we'll also have the Western Big Six preview with the guys from WQAD, and we're also going to bring in Matt Shuckman from down in Quincy to give us his perspective as well. Before we go, I do once again want to thank our sponsor at Breedlove Sporting Goods, Western Illinois' premier sporting goods store for uniforms, apparel, equipment, awards, online team store with a primary focus on the western side of the state. Breedlove Sporting Goods is the fastest way to outfit your team. Find them on Facebook or at breedlovesports.com. And yes, Kyle, before we go, your shirt is amazing. We got to talk about this. So we talked way a long time ago about Gage Dunker, who is running back senior at Lena Winslow. His brother, Jennings Dunker, is now at Iowa. And man, he is making a name for himself in maybe the most unique way possible.
Yeah, I mean, he's 2-time hay bale king at the Solon hay bale toss.
That's right, the Solon hay bale toss every year, and he's a 2-time defending champion now.
And now the record holder with the highest throw.
Wow. So your shirt is
a new record.
Shirt is a ray gun shirt that's with a big hay bale in the middle and a 67 is number. I cheer for the hay bale king. I love it. Talk about repping the NUIC. That's great.
Well, and Iowa has him slated to start at right tackle to start the year, so that's even better.
Hey, there you go. Yeah, he's going to make an impact on the field as well. I mean, we've seen his strength, with the hay bales. So
yeah, huge strength.
All right, Kyle. Well, we will definitely be in touch. We'll be interacting on Twitter for sure. Once again, thank you for being here. And to everyone listening, stay tuned. Keep listening to our previews. And before you know it, we're going to be talking about the games, the real thing. So I can't wait. That'll do it for this week's episode of View from the West. Thank you so much for listening. I encourage you to go out to Apple Podcasts or Podbean and subscribe so you can follow along, and downloads will come automatically every week. You can follow along on Twitter at ViewFromWestPod. You can also email me if you're interested in being a sponsor, viewfromwestpod@gmail.com. Thanks so much. We'll see you next week.